Well, hello and welcome back. My name is Stephen Elliot. I am the Program Vice President at IDC for DevOps, Infrastructure and Operations, as well as related themes for Site Reliability Engineering. And today, it's my honor to be here to moderate a panel with tremendous expertise around Site Reliability Engineering, scaling SRE practices, and best practices to drive success for business outcomes. And let me turn it right over to Penelope. We're going to do some introductions here and get started. Go ahead, Penelope.
Hi, so my name is Penelope Fippen. I use she or they pronouns. I'm a staff software engineer at Stripe on our API services team. Currently, what that actually means is I'm working on decomposing Stripe's monolithic API.
Great. And Jonathan.
Hi, I'm John Margie. I work for Adobe. I'm an engineering lead. I started here as a site reliability engineer. I've worked on a few different product teams, and right now I'm working primarily in the observability space and helping teams understand everything observability and how to implement SLIs and SLOs.
That's great. Gareth.
Hi, I'm Gareth Eason from Schibsted. I'm the group CIO there, but before then I managed SRE teams, and my background includes working with the likes of Ads SRE and Google. So very interested in service level objectives, indicators, and of course agreements.
Bart.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Bart Enkelaar. I work at Bol.com as a lead site reliability engineer, and I'm really looking to push site reliability engineering as our next step on our DevOps journey, and as such, really trying to scale the way we implement SLIs and SLOs everywhere.
Great. And Kit.
Hey there, Kit Merker here. I'm the COO at Noble9. We make an SLO platform, and we're also the organizers of SLOconf. So we announced yesterday Open SLO, and I'm really excited to be talking with everybody about site reliability engineering and service level objectives. Thanks, Stephen.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. Let's hop right into this because there's a lot of interest in the topic, and obviously the majority of IT enterprises are adopting these practices and capabilities. So one of the things we often get a lot of inquiry around is what makes SLOs difficult to implement. And with all the great experience here, love to get your take on, number one, what you found that makes it hard to implement, and maybe some practices that you use to drive success for those implementations. Why don't we start with John?
Sure. So for me at Adobe, and I think just even dealing with friends in the industry, what's made implementing SLOs difficult at times is simply changing people's mindset from, hey, is this service up or down, to monitoring the actual customer journey and experience. What I mean by that is traditional monitoring, you're monitoring services, KPIs, et cetera. With SLIs and SLOs, it's a shift into, hey, is my service doing what the end customer actually needs in a reliable, fast fashion and a responsive time? So the one I like to use as an example is you have a shopping cart app, someone goes to checkout, and you could just end monitoring there, but you want to make sure that if they add something to their cart, that they were actually able to successfully check out too. So you want to monitor that end-to-end experience and make sure that, you know, you're monitoring the good over total events that you're processing, et cetera. And that's where SLOs really helps, is making sure that this functionality works and that you're not just saying, yep, the service is up, but not actually capturing the experience. So with that being said, I think SLOs are worth it because it does give you that extra level of visibility, and it is hard to implement, but you just have to kind of fail fast and continue to evangelize with teams and make sure that, you know, they're understanding the shift and the terminology.
You're good, Penelope.
I've recently been doing a lot of one-on-one work with like engineering managers at Stripe to help them develop like the first order SLOs for their team. And one thing we found that's like really interesting that's hard with SLOs is like getting to a point where we can actually just measure like the things our customers actually care about. So like what do you do if you're running some tooling on an end developer laptop because they're integrating with an API that sends you webhooks? What do you do if you're sending a customer email? How do you check they actually got the email? Like all kinds of sort of like what does it mean for this thing to actually succeed, and how do we measure that, can be like very, very complicated in, our modern environments where everyone's on the cloud, everyone's distributed. Like, where does responsibility begin and end across teams? Is this team owning the right SLO? Like, which other teams do we need to get involved? And so to some degree, it's like what I hear a lot is like, yes, I think we're the right owner for this, but like this SLO is implicating, 5 or 6 other teams. Like, how do we talk to them about this, right? Like, how do we compose with Mongo or SQS or the messaging team, right? And so that, like, I see a lot of engineering managers who are very nervous to commit to SLOs where they don't necessarily have commitments from their dependencies, and how to navigate that conversation has been pretty tricky as well.
Yeah, I'd like to add to I think both what Jonathan and Penelope said, that with this new way of thinking about reliability comes a responsibility that is across different teams that are currently not organized in that fashion. And I think this not only mindset shift, but also kind of organizational shift that you need, which I think aligns much better with the value chain that actually brings reliability. But I think there's both the value there, but also really the difficulty, because this means that people need to get out of their comfort zone, and they need to engage that conversation with other people that were previously not talking to each other.
So I think, as you say, Penelope, there's a challenge getting an SLO from a dependency or exposing an SLO to a dependent. But that's also one of the advantages of SLOs, that it allows this inter-team communication and expectation setting. And one of the most powerful features we've seen from actually doing SLOs, even if it's just a made-up SLO that we think we can maybe hit, is it sets our error budget. And that sets a very strong expectation with how we work with other teams and how other teams can expect to work and receive our services.
And yeah, just to riff off that, where I was sort of discussing this difficulty with engineering managers doing it for the first time, I'm frequently just like, make up what your customer wants, and then if we don't hit it, we can go have a conversation with our dependents. Like say we discover that the reason we're not hitting our SLO is that the webhook queuing system isn't meeting the latency requirements that our customers have. Well, that's a great forcing function for us to go have a conversation with that team about why it's hard, right? And so like frequently, I think this is best when it's customer first. And if that means you have to like make something up outside of the existing technical constraints of your system to be able to write something down, that's a fantastic forcing function, because you've started with the customer, and that enables you to not just go to engineering teams, but also product teams and be like, look, we can't satisfy the customer requirements on this product, and here's why. And then it's not just engineering having this conversation, it's your product function as well, right?
Yeah, and Kit, I'd love to, we've talked, it's been fascinating, right? We've talked about organizational constructs. We've talked about forcing functions for collaboration. We've talked about the role of observability. We've talked about the importance of getting folks bought in and involved in the discussion early on, and the need for end-to-end visibility. What have you seen, in addition to some of those that you would advise organizations on in terms of why it's worth it, and maybe how to implement an SLO?
Well, I think one of the key parts of this why it's worth it question, I think, is that chasing reliability and trying to make everything perfect is kind of a fool's errand. And what we see with organizations that are trying to strive for as much reliability as possible is they end up throwing a lot of energy and resources at things that don't actually matter to customers. And then they're surprised that they can't achieve the goal anyway. And so I think what SLOs let you do is really set clear expectations and create gross margin profitability in an organization, because now you're actually focused on the things that matter to customers and you're finding efficiency. So what is kind of counterintuitive, but reliability engineering is actually about shipping more features. It's actually about finding the right balance. It's about finding excellence for customers. I think the second thing is we're seeing people, and I know you've written about this, Stephen, but we're seeing people shift away from SLAs as this very kind of legalistic idea where you're setting kind of the minimum threshold, the baseline, the part where we all get kind of pissed off at each other, to be frank. And we're moving toward this SLO concept that's about modeling excellence. And I think this is really a different way of thinking about it. You know, we're saying let's set a target for what we actually want to achieve, and if we don't make it, let's have a conversation. Not let's set a target for what we think we can sandbag to, hide our outages, and sue each other, which is what SLAs represent. And this is, I think, one of the biggest shifts happening in the market. The other piece, that's how you satisfy management, okay? The other piece of this is SLOs as code. And this leads into why we created OpenSLO. One of the key ideas here is that if you can get it to be in the code, that's really the truth. The truth is in the code. And SLOs being checked in, being part of the application, we're seeing everything shift left. We're seeing everything move into this code and CI/CD concept. Why not the actual reliability targets themselves? And I think this is the other big thing we're seeing, is that empowering developers to encode the business rules into SLOs creates something fundamentally different than a dashboard or a meeting, right? It becomes something that's about the application and infrastructure itself. So to me, these are the big ideas that are really driving this change. And when I've seen organizations be successful with SLOs, they've followed these principles. They've changed the way they've talked about it with the business, and they've changed the way that they've implemented it in the infrastructure.
Yeah, that's great. That's great points. And certainly if anyone listening, watching this, clearly the customer is at the core of everything. And you can also sort of get the sense that this is about the business, right? And how profit margin, revenue, customer experience, really tying a tight link between all the information that ops, observability teams, performance teams have been collecting and continue to collect, but really saying, look, this is what it means to the customer. You know, this is what it means to our profit margins. This is what it means to our revenue opportunities. And it's all around the system reliability focus. So, you know, Kate, you mentioned something that was announced, the OpenSLO, and love to get the group's reaction to that. And if you missed it, the OpenSLO was launched as a spec, and it provides a common open source spec for SLO creation and potentially driving end user adoption and making it easier for app performance, observability, logging tools to drive implementation of SLOs in their platforms in a vendor neutral way. Be curious. I know this esteemed panel has lots of opinions on this. Love to sort of maybe start with Bart. You know, what's your reaction? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'm very excited about this announcement. I'm also on the API Brain Trust within Bol.com, so I'm a great fan of, for example, the Open API spec, which is basically similar for RESTful APIs, but then like the functional side. And the weird thing is about these SLI reliability concepts. They have always been like the non-functional aspects, which is a horrible misnomer because if you're not meeting them, then your API is not functional at all. So I really think that having a first-class open source specification language for codifying these reliability concepts is vital. And I really hope that maybe even OpenSLO v3 and OpenAPI v5 might be compatible somewhere, because I think these reliability features and these functional features, they are both sides of the same coin, and you need to have them both. So I'm over the moon with this announcement.
And Penelope, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so before I was a software engineer at Stripe, I was a developer advocate at Google, right? And one of the principles, you know, developer advocates tend to espouse is like starting with any API design is better than starting with no API design at all, right? And so like in the sense where, you know, everywhere I've implemented and tracked and seen SLOs done, like it's like ad hoc, there's a management system somewhere, maybe it's inserting like Prometheus queries into a database, like maybe it's going out to, you know, Presto or Spark or like some other tool, that like every company seems to invent doing SLOs in an ad hoc way, right? And so like in my head, this idea of having like a standard where we're checking them into source control, we can view the evolution of them over time, all of that good stuff is really, really great. Basically, this is something I very much wanted, is a way to, right next to the protobuf definitions, right next to the build configuration for my service, check in, and this is the operational constraints, right? As I sort of said earlier, one of the big problems we have is, tracking, do our SLOs make sense given the SLOs of our dependencies? And with an open standard like this, we can, walk through the tree and see oh, we have 5 nines here and 4 nines there. Well, that doesn't make sense. So now we need to go and have this conversation, right? And so I think this is a really, really strong idea.
And John, what are your thoughts?
I think it's great. Having an open spec for open SLO is great, because the industry as a whole I've seen is moving towards open standards, right? So having the same thing for SLOs is great. So it helps me have conversations with any team about what makes a good SLO. How do you standardize on an SLO? When I've had conversations with people at Adobe or outside of Adobe, a lot of times, what I've told people is ultimately everyone means well, but if you don't have a standardization layer, you see things implemented in many different ways, and it makes it very hard to understand, are your SLIs set up correctly, your SLOs, et cetera. So then in addition, also having something like OpenSLO, where it's a YAML file and you can check it into code, and it's part of the developer ecosystem that they're already friendly with, that's great. So then you can also, take the business requirements, write them into code. And oftentimes I find engineers don't really understand the business aspect. Sometimes they just want to code. So if you just give them this and say, here's the business value, here's what you need to do, put it into code, I think it just ultimately works out better for everyone.
And Gareth, I suspect we know what you might say, but what would you agree with the rest of the group?
So definitely, I have maybe a different thought on it as well. I love to see a standard because I'm a big fan of the Unix philosophy, where do one thing and do it well. And this standard enables all those third-party tools that all want to sell into our businesses to be compatible with each other, so we can start, as we build more of these standards for, as you say, Open API, Bart mentioned, and Open SLO and various other standards, we can actually start to pick the best of breed of our tools. We can integrate them cleanly. We can have some sense of reliability when we change out a tool, that things will continue to work, as well as all the good stuff already mentioned. It essentially gives our engineers a method of clearly defining SLOs, where this is something that's actually missing from most of the metrics and observability and APM type tools. We can look at metrics, but for every engineer, I found a new method of how they particularly set up the SLO to be monitored. So really good progress, lots more to do.
And Kit, your thoughts?
Well, I want to make sure one thing is clear, is that we're not trying to declare ourselves the standard. OpenSLO came out of collaboration from people who are already doing SLOs. If you look at the folks at GitLab who had already built their own internal SLO language, if you look at the Captain project that came out of Dynatrace, they already had an SLO format. And one of the things we did is we said, look, let's take something that's functional and let's make it a minimum specification. And we also released Oslo, which is a command line tool that can validate, and we have some other ideas in store for how that will make it easy to manage and share. But I think one of the other pieces of this, we think of SLOs as something related to the APM vendors and the sort of observability and incident response. I think the greater opportunity is for open source projects like Kubernetes or Kafka or Redis or MongoDB to also publish their own SLOs in a format. And if you think about consuming these now very popular open source projects, bringing them into your infrastructure and understanding the reliability constraints and the shape of it and being able to customize that and tune it, this to me will drive huge adoption and make it everybody's life easier as a reliability engineer. Right now I can consume not only my internal dependencies and have a common language, as Penelope said, right? Being able to reason about SLOs in a way that is consistent, and I'm not guessing about what your intention was, but now consuming across open source boundaries, across cloud, et cetera. So my hope is that as we get more and more consensus around the design as we get more and more capability defined into it, that it won't just be about the kind of this niche of the observability players and incident response companies, but also the broader set of workloads and infrastructure that we really need to be reliable in order for us to, and by the way, reliable and efficient, right? In order for us to run our software projects and businesses. So I'm personally super excited. We're looking for more people. Tons of response yesterday already. New pull requests are showing up. New issues are getting filed. So very exciting to have this project at its very beginning.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And I think it is something in the industry that is going to be very well accepted. I think there's going to be a lot of people who are looking for a level of ease of adoption, ease of data integration, just driving more efficiencies. I remember a number of years ago, an IT CIO told me, the fastest way for their organization to get a higher ROI and business outcomes is through a certain level of standardization. And I think that's where there's a lot of folks in the industry today looking at, how can I standardize to the extent that they're comfortable with to drive faster business outcomes, better business resiliency, and just, in this case, higher levels of system reliability. So it seems to be a nice natural evolution of not only where we are today, but where the market's going to go. Now, we've got about 6 or so minutes left. Love to go around the horn here, and if you were advising an IT organization, your peers, and they're thinking about maybe starting the SLO path, maybe they're a couple years into it and looking to scale it out. From your own perspectives, what would you say is a practice, maybe a pitfall to avoid, something that you would give them advice around, whether it's getting started or scaling out their SRE practices, SLO, et cetera. Why don't we start with Kit? Why don't we start with you?
My advice is to get started somewhere. I mean, one of the things I see is a lot of teams that are trying to adopt these things and they can't quite figure out how. And this is one of the reasons why we started SLOconf. It's which is this virtual event with all this content. And it's the reason we started Noble 9. We wanted to make it easier for people to actually drive an outcome. And so my advice is to not be overwhelmed with trying to make it perfect. Just like the methodology of SRE and SLO is to try to make it better and to try to be balanced in your approach to both efficiency and reliability. And I think it all starts with the customer, and it all starts with us getting smarter about data and having better conversations about the real trade-offs in building any sort of software services.
Great. And how about Gareth?
I guess I can try and boil it down to 3 pieces of advice. One is learn Goodhart's law and appreciate how that implies or how that affects how people look at measures and metrics. Secondly, look at error budgets and sell those to your management teams. They are a fantastic way of driving the right behaviors across multiple teams and getting stuff done. And thirdly, review your SLOs with your customers. 2 of my teams, I have been reducing the SLO with them because they've been missing the SLOs they set, but the customer feedback was stellar. We just set them too high, but it was a great start.
That's great. How about John?
Yeah, so for me, I would say continue to advocate with teams. SLOs and SLIs are a topic that you need to continually work with people on. Also, make sure you're doing this in a phased approach. I've seen some organizations try and say we're going to implement SLIs and SLOs across all of our services in a quarter, right? That's not necessarily the right thing to do. Let's pick a few services, figure out how to do this correctly, and then move on from there. Make sure you have good data and that you're setting up your SLIs and SLOs correctly. And also, be flexible, right? Work with your teammates, understand their needs, and understand that this is a moving target, like I said at times. Also, as Gareth alluded to, right? Like sometimes you might set a SLO too high, right? Your customers are always going to be happy, but you want to be right in the middle somewhere where it's customer happiness and engineering happiness. You want to reduce the pain for your engineers as well. You want to make sure everyone is accommodated.
And Penelope.
Yeah, so maybe to echo just a little bit of what we're hearing here, right? That like in my head, SLOs are at their best when you start with the customer. Who is your customer? What do they care about? What are we actually trying to achieve here with the software? I think a lot of engineering teams want to go straight into the technical details. How are we going to measure this? Which data systems are we going to hook into, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The technical details are the least important part of the SLO, right? And so when I'm working with teams who've never done this before, literally the very first question I ask them is, who is your customer? Just accurately describe to me who we're even trying to service here, and we can figure everything else out later. And I think that's a super important detail to get started with for teams.
And Bart.
Yeah, I think many relevant things have already been said. And one thing I'd like to add is that if you're helping a company through a journey of reliability, and if you're in the team spearheading this way of thinking, then you're quite likely one of the furthest at that company in your frame of thinking about reliability, about SLO, especially in this context, because of course everyone who has run software thinks about reliability in some sense, but this alignment that we have on service level objectives, on site reliability engineering, that is a particular language that is really helpful in framing these kinds of reliability questions. So if you are the team spearheading that, then you don't be afraid to keep repeating yourself, because naturally you're the ones who are farthest ahead in this way of thinking. So it really depends on which team you interact with and which individuals you interact with, how far they are along. So you should always be prepared to go back to basics and take them along. It's like, no, this is uptime and this is availability, things like that.
Yeah, and I would say the one thing that surprised me in many of these conversations with IT organizations, it's a lot to what everyone echoed, but it starts with who's on the bus. The leadership, the team that's going to make it happen, their ability and perspective to understand some of the technology, but to also understand its relevance to the business, their ability to define the customer, their understanding of their balance of metrics and their roles with SLOs and SLIs, and just having a pragmatic approach and a realization that, this is the right path forward, and make sure that you overcome the political inertia and the challenges to not just get it started, but to scale it out and to stay with it. I think a lot of business executives are starting to realize, especially over the past 15 months, that their success is directly tied to their technology architecture. And there's no doubt that the system reliability has an impact on any business's success at this point. If a CEO doesn't understand that, they probably won't be a CEO that much longer. And so, this is clearly one of those areas that is going to continue to grow, get tremendous attention and funding. And, without a doubt, it reminds me of a lot of the DevOps movement of 2008, 2009, where we are. And sort of now it's even probably in some case accelerating faster because it's so obvious, but it's also an extension of where a lot of folks have been trying to go, but haven't necessarily had the model to do it. And now there's this model, and there's great technologies out there supporting it and driving success. So with that, I want to thank everyone on the panel. I think this has been a tremendous conversation, a tremendous amount of value provided to the audience, and I certainly appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here and having a great conversation.